She texted him at 2 a.m., not because she needed anything, not because something was wrong, but because she couldn't stop wondering what he was thinking about. If you've ever done this, or someone's done it to you, you've witnessed the most overlooked sign of emotional attachment. And what happened next will change how you see every relationship in your life. Meet Sarah and Marcus. They've been casually dating for 3 months. No labels, no pressure, just vibes, as they tell their friends. But something shifted last Tuesday, and neither of them has acknowledged it yet. Marcus was at a work conference in another city. Sarah was home, scrolling through Netflix, unable to pick anything. She'd already checked her phone 17 times in the past hour. Then, at 2:14 a.m., she did something she told herself she wouldn't do. She sent him a random thought. Not a question, not a meme, just, do you think people can actually taste the difference between expensive and cheap olive oil? Or are we all just pretending? Here's what most people miss about emotional attachment. It's not about the big declarations or dramatic moments. It's hidden in the micro behaviors we don't even notice we're doing. When Sarah sent that text, she wasn't looking for information about olive oil. She was doing something psychologists call cognitive broadcasting, the unconscious need to share your internal world with a specific person, even when it serves no practical purpose. This is vastly different from attraction or infatuation. Attraction makes you want to be near someone. Infatuation makes you idealize them. But emotional attachment? That makes you need them as a witness to your existence. Think about it. You don't text random thoughts to just anyone. You might share them with your best friend of 10 years, maybe your sibling, occasionally a parent. But when you start doing this with someone new, someone you've only known for 3 months, that's your limbic system, the emotional center of your brain, reassigning roles. The moment you start broadcasting random thoughts, mundane observations, or half-formed ideas to someone, especially at odd hours, your brain has already woven them into your emotional fabric. You've unconsciously assigned them the role of person who should know what I'm thinking. Neuroscientists have found that when we form emotional attachments, our brain releases oxytocin not just during physical contact, but during these seemingly insignificant moments of mental connection. Every time Sarah thought about texting Marcus, her brain was reinforcing a neural pathway that associated him with comfort, safety, and belonging. And here's the part that makes this so powerful. Marcus replied within 4 minutes. At 2:18 a.m., he wasn't asleep. He'd been lying awake too, scrolling mindlessly, waiting for nothing in particular. Except he was actually waiting for her. He just didn't know it yet. His response? Honestly, I think it's 60% placebo, 40% actual taste. But the real question is, why are you thinking about olive oil at 2 a.m.? Notice what he did there. He didn't just answer. He turned it into a conversation. He wanted to know what was happening in her mind. That reciprocal curiosity? That's attachment mirroring itself back. But cognitive broadcasting is just the surface. Let's go deeper. 3 days after the olive oil text, Sarah and Marcus were supposed to meet for coffee. Marcus got stuck in traffic and was running 23 minutes late. When he finally arrived, Sarah wasn't annoyed. She wasn't even slightly irritated. Instead, she'd ordered his usual drink and had been working on her laptop, completely unbothered. This is the second sign nobody talks about: emotional constancy. When you're emotionally attached to someone, their absence doesn't create anxiety. It creates patience. You don't spiral into, "Where are they?" or "Why aren't they texting back?" Instead, you simply wait. Because your attachment has created what psychologists call an internal secure base. Even when they're not physically present, the emotional foundation they provide remains stable. This concept comes from attachment theory, originally developed by psychologist John Bowlby. He observed that securely attached children could explore their environment confidently because they knew their caregiver was there. They didn't need constant reassurance. The same principle applies to adult romantic attachment. Sarah didn't need Marcus to show up on time to feel secure. His lateness didn't threaten her sense of connection because that connection had already become internalized. She carried it with her now. Compare this to the early stages of dating, where a 20-minute delay can trigger entire mental narratives. Are they losing interest? Did I say something wrong? Should I text them? That's anxious attachment talking. But when emotional constancy develops, those narratives quiet down. You trust the connection enough to let it breathe. When Marcus finally walked in, apologizing profusely, Sarah just smiled and slid his coffee across the table. "Caramel latte, extra shot, light ice," she said. "I know you hate when the ice waters it down." Marcus stopped mid-apology. She'd remembered, not just his order but his specific pet peeve about diluted coffee, something he'd mentioned once in passing 3 weeks ago. Meanwhile, Marcus noticed something odd about himself that week. He'd been in a meeting with his boss, an important one about a potential promotion, and in the middle of discussing quarterly targets, his brain flashed to Sarah. Not in a distracted, "I wish I was with her instead" way, but more like, "I wonder what she'd think about this approach." He found himself mentally rehearsing how he'd explain the project to her later, even though she worked in a completely different field and would have no practical input on his marketing strategy. This brings us to the third and most overlooked sign of emotional attachment: unconscious consultation. When someone becomes emotionally attached, they start running their thoughts, decisions, and experiences through an invisible filter shaped by the other person. Marcus wasn't asking for Sarah's opinion. She wasn't even there. But his brain had automatically started including her perspective in his internal decision-making process. This happens because emotional attachment literally rewires your neural pathways. Studies using fMRI scans show that when we think about someone we're attached to, it activates the same brain regions involved in self-referential thinking. In other words, the line between you and them starts to blur at a neurological level. You stop making decisions purely for yourself. You start thinking in terms of we, even before there's officially a we. Dr. Arthur Aaron, a psychologist who studies romantic love, conducted experiments showing that people in love exhibit self-other overlap. They literally begin to include their partner's characteristics, resources, and perspectives into their own self-concept. This isn't conscious. You can't decide to do it. It just happens when attachment deepens. Marcus experienced this in small ways throughout the week. He passed a bookstore and saw a novel about architecture, Sarah's field, and went in to browse, even though he'd never cared about architecture before. He ordered Thai food and automatically got an extra spring roll, forgetting for a moment that she wasn't there to share it. He even caught himself about to send her a meme, then realized he'd already sent her 3 that day and didn't want to seem excessive. That's self-monitoring? That's also a sign. When you start regulating how often you reach out because you care about how you're perceived, you're emotionally invested. Here's where it gets fascinating. Sarah experienced the same thing from a different angle. She was at her sister's birthday dinner when her aunt made a joke about her still being single. Normally, Sarah would have felt that familiar sting of judgment. But this time, she felt nothing, because in her mind, she wasn't single anymore. She and Marcus hadn't defined anything. They hadn't had the talk. But emotionally, her brain had already made the shift.
Later that night, her sister pulled her aside. "You seem different," she said. "Lighter? What's going on?"
Sarah shrugged, but she knew exactly what had changed. She'd stopped carrying the weight of uncertainty that comes with being unattached. Even without labels, even without guarantees, some part of her had already decided, this person matters, this person is mine, and I am theirs. 2 weeks later, Marcus got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold. He mentioned it casually over text, adding one of those "don't worry about it" messages that people send when they secretly hope you'll worry about it. Sarah showed up at his apartment 3 hours later with soup, throat lozenges, and a documentary she thought he'd like. She didn't ask if he wanted company. She didn't check if it was too much. She just came. This is the fourth sign, and it's the one that often scares people the most. Unprompted caretaking. When you're emotionally attached, you develop an almost parental vigilance about the other person's well-being. Not in a controlling way, but in a protective one. You notice when they seem tired in their texts. You remember they mentioned having a stressful week. You pick up on subtle shifts in their tone that other people would completely miss. And here's the crucial part. You act on it without needing to be asked. Because taking care of them has become a natural extension of taking care of yourself.
You didn't have to come.
I know.
They watched the documentary in comfortable silence. She didn't try to fix him or make him talk. She didn't need him to entertain her or be on. She was just there, present, steady, creating a safe space for him to be sick and vulnerable and human. This is what unprompted caretaking really looks like. It's not grand gestures. It's showing up when someone feels unlovable. It's bearing witness to their weakness without judgment. It's saying, through actions rather than words, your suffering matters to me. Research on attachment shows that one of the strongest predictors of secure romantic bonds is responsiveness to distress. When your partner is struggling and you respond with presence and care, without needing credit or recognition, you're building what psychologists call a safe haven. Marcus cried when Sarah left that night. Not big dramatic sobs, just tears that surprised him while he was alone on his couch. He couldn't explain why. She'd just brought him soup. But his emotional system understood what his conscious mind was still processing. Someone had shown up for him without conditions, without needing credit, without making it about them. That's when you know attachment has fully formed. When receiving care feels overwhelming because you're not used to being someone's priority. The next morning, Marcus woke up to a text from Sarah. "How are you feeling? Don't answer if you're still asleep. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you." It was 7:42 a.m. She'd thought about him first thing in the morning, before coffee, before checking her emails, before doing anything else. Her brain had gone. Is he okay? So let's bring this full circle. If someone does this, and by this, I mean any combination of these four signs, they're emotionally attached. 1. They broadcast their random thoughts to you at odd hours, making you a witness to their internal world. 2. They maintain emotional constancy in your absence, neither anxious nor needy, but patiently present. 3. They unconsciously consult your perspective when making decisions, even when you're not physically there. 4. They engage in unprompted caretaking, noticing and responding to your needs before you articulate them. Here's what makes this different from lists you've seen before. These aren't things people do to impress you or win you over. These are involuntary behaviors that emerge when attachment has already formed at a subconscious level. You can't fake cognitive broadcasting. You can't manufacture emotional constancy. These patterns emerge from genuine neural rewiring that happens when someone becomes fundamentally important to your psychological architecture. 3 months after the olive oil text, Sarah and Marcus finally had the talk. But here's the twist. It wasn't dramatic or scary. It felt like confirming something they'd both already known but hadn't named yet. "I think I've been in love with you since that night you showed up with soup. I think I've been in love with you since you answered my ridiculous olive oil question at 2 a.m. They both laughed. Because they'd spent months doing all the things emotionally attached people do. Caring, showing up, making space for each other in their internal worlds, without ever calling it what it was. The truth about emotional attachment is this: it happens long before you're ready to admit it. Your brain knows before your heart catches up. Your behavior changes before your words do. So if you're watching this and recognizing these patterns, either in yourself or in how someone treats you, Stop questioning it. Stop waiting for more proof. The attachment is already there. The only question is whether you're brave enough to honor what your unconscious mind has already decided. Have you ever broadcast your thoughts to someone at 2 a.m.? Drop a comment below. And if this opened your eyes to attachment patterns you didn't recognize, hit that subscribe button, because we're diving deeper into the psychology of connection next week.